With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to...
King Charles just removed Queen Camilla's crown in public. In a stunning ceremony that shocked the world, the king placed the sacred regalia directly onto Princess Catherine. The palace is in absolute chaos as a dramatic, unannounced shift in the royal hierarchy unfolds before the live television cameras. The crown jewels move at midnight. The iron gates of the Tower of London ground to a halt precisely at midnight on November 14th, 2025. A thick fog rolled off the River Thames, obscuring the armed guards stationed along the outer wall. Inside the jewel house, the air was completely still. The glass display cases containing the world's most famous regalia were bathed in low security lighting. Suddenly, a heavy oak door opened, and the keeper of the jewel house entered, accompanied by two armed officers from the Royal Protection Command. He held an official document bearing the royal sign manual. It was an unannounced sovereign warrant issued directly by King Charles. The document carried an immediate executive order to open the secure vault housing the crown of the Queen Consort. The vault required a multi-layered authentication process, involving both physical keys and biometric verification from the senior keeper. The officers stood in complete silence as the heavy pneumatic seals of the vault hissed open. The keeper reached inside and carefully lifted the historic piece of regalia from its velvet cushion. The tiny mystery of the midnight operation was resolved instantly. The crown being moved was the magnificent platinum frame adorned with thousands of diamonds, originally crafted for the late Queen Mother. It was the premier symbol of consort authority within the British state. But as the keeper placed the priceless artifact into a specialized, reinforced transit case, a much larger question gripped the room. Why was the king moving the most sacred symbol of his wife's status in the dead of night, without the knowledge of her personal security detail? The traditional protocol for moving the crown jewels required weeks of advanced planning, administrative clearances, and official coordination with the Home Office. Yet, this operation bypassed every single established channel. Camilla's chief of staff had signed off on the official schedule just hours before, completely unaware that the physical crown was being removed from its repository. The secrecy was absolute. The transit case was locked with a digital tracking seal that routed its location directly to Prince William's private security office at Windsor Castle. The two armed officers escorted the keeper down the secure subterranean stone corridors toward the rear courtyard of the fortress. A plain, unmarked armored vehicle sat waiting with its engine running quietly. The driver did not step out. He simply pressed a button to release the rear electronic locks. The keeper slid the transit case into the reinforced compartment, and the doors slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud. The vehicle moved out of the gates, disappearing into the dark London streets within seconds. The destination was not Buckingham Palace. The armored transport turned west, heading directly toward the private state dressing rooms of the venues selected for the upcoming morning ceremony. The king had arranged for the asset to be placed under the exclusive custody of Princess Catherine's personal protection team. This layout meant that when the sun rose, the crown would already be under the physical control of the next generation, completely out of reach for Camilla's administrative staff. The immediate tension inside the jewel house subsided, but the institutional shockwave was just beginning to spread through the higher echelons of the palace security network. A lone night operator within the central monitoring hub noticed the sudden deactivation of the specific display sensor. He picked up the secure telephone line to report the anomaly, only to be met by a senior director who instructed him to log the movement as an authorized state adjustment. The order had come straight from the top. Charles had engineered the midnight removal to ensure that the physical crown could not be used as leverage during the domestic negotiations planned for the morning. He knew that once the regalia left the tower under a sovereign warrant, its ceremonial destination was legally irreversible. The stage was set, the asset was secured, and the most dramatic public transition in modern royal history was now safely in motion. The private abdication of status. The heavy iron doors of the Royal Archives room inside Windsor Castle swung open at 2 o'clock in the morning on November 14th, 2025. King Charles walked in alone, his heavy wool overcoat still damp from the autumn rain. Waiting for him inside were two senior constitutional lawyers and the head of the Privy Council. On the central table lay a single piece of vellum paper. It was a formal amendment to the 1937 Regalia Act. Charles did not sit down. He picked up his reading glasses and looked at the text. The document before him was a legal instrument designed to alter the ceremonial hierarchy of the upcoming state opening of Parliament. For over 8 months, private discussions had been taking place regarding the long-term symbolic future of the crown. The king's health struggles had forced the palace to think about the transition of institutional power. The lawyers had discovered an ancient loophole within the sovereign prerogative clauses. The sovereign held absolute personal control over the deployment of all crown jewels during state events. Charles dipped a gold fountain pen into black ink and signed his name at the bottom of the page. The small mystery of why the lawyers were gathered in the middle of the night was resolved. The king had just legally stripped Queen Camilla of her right to wear the consort crown at the next state occasion. But this act opened a much deeper, more volatile question for the monarchy. Why was the king taking such a drastic step in complete secrecy, bypassing the traditional approval loops of the cabinet office? The signature on the vellum paper meant that the upcoming public ceremony would not be a standard display of royal unity. It was designed to be a controlled public demotion. Charles walked over to the fireplace, watching the paper dry under the desk lamp. He told the lead attorney that the document must be couriered to the Home Office before sunrise. The legal reality was stark. Under the new amendment, the title of Queen Consort remained legally active for Camilla, but her ceremonial right to wear the crown of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was officially revoked. The document transferred the temporary custodianship of that specific crown to the office of the Princess of Wales. It was a structural shift disguised as the administrative update. The tension among the small group of officials was palpable. They knew that if a single detail of this document leaked to the press before the ceremony, it would trigger a massive constitutional crisis. The Prime Minister would be forced to answer questions in the House of Commons about the internal stability of the royal household. Charles turned to the Privy Council representative and stated that the arrangement must remain strictly confidential until the moment the procession entered the venue. He was determined to let the public see the transition happen live, leaving no room for political interference or domestic debate. The king's decision was rooted in a series of private family meetings that had occurred over the previous 3 weeks. The financial audits from the earlier months had left a permanent stain on the trust between Charles and his wife. The king had realized that the future survival of the House of Windsor depended entirely on the public standing of Prince William and Princess Catherine. The public adored Catherine, viewing her as the stable anchor of the modern crown. By placing the ceremonial weight onto her shoulders early, Charles was signaling to the world that the next generation was already taking over the symbolic duties of the state. At 3 o'clock in the morning, a secure vehicle departed Windsor Castle carrying the signed vellum document straight to the state vaults at the Tower of London. The master of the jewel house had already received an encrypted alert. His instructions were clear. He was to remove the Queen Mother's crown from its public display case and place it into a reinforced transit case. The crown, adorned with the famous 21-carat diamond, was to be transported under armed police escort to a private dressing room inside the venue hours before the public arrived. Charles left the archives room and walked back through the long, dark corridors of the castle. He knew that when Camilla woke up, her staff would receive the updated ceremonial briefing notes. The layout of the procession had been completely rewritten. She would no longer walk directly beside the king during the grand entrance. Instead, she was scheduled to arrive ahead of the main party, seated in a secondary box rather than on the main throne platform. The stage was set for a public transfer of status that no one in the modern era had ever witnessed. The king entered his private sitting room, where William was waiting for him. The Prince of Wales looked at his father and asked if the signing was complete. Charles nodded slowly and sat down in his armchair. He stated that the legal framework was locked. William pulled up the live security feed of the Tower of London on his tablet. Watching the gates open for the transit vehicle, the heir apparent knew that this move would permanently alter the family dynamic, but he also knew it was the only way to secure the institution's longevity. William looked at his father and noted that Catherine was already preparing for her role in the morning ceremony. She had been briefed on the exact movements required during the presentation phase. The family had managed to keep the operation completely hidden from Camilla's personal secretaries, who were still operating under the assumption that the traditional protocol would be followed. The clock was ticking toward dawn, and the most stunning public display of royal realignment was now less than 6 hours away. Catherine's quiet, summoning. The lights were completely off on the ground floor of Adelaide Cottage when the secure courier vehicle arrived at 4 o'clock in the morning. Princess Catherine sat by the window in her private sitting room, dressed in a tailored navy blue wool dress. She had been awake since 3, waiting for the confirmation text from Prince William. The phone on her lap buzzed once, displaying an encrypted green checkmark. The midnight transfer from the Tower of London was complete. The crown of the Queen Mother was now locked inside the venue's secure vault, sitting under the guard of her own personal protection officers. A soft knock at the front door broke the silence of the cottage. Catherine walked down the stairs herself, bypassing the household staff who were still asleep in the rear wing. She opened the door to find Sir John Stevens, the King's private constitutional secretary. He held a leather dispatch box stamped with the royal cipher in gold leaf. He did not step inside the hallway. He simply bowed his head, handed the box to the princess, and stated that the king requested her immediate signature on the receipt of temporary custodianship. The small mystery of who delivered the final sovereign decree was resolved. It was the king's most trusted legal advisor, confirming that the operation was fully sanctioned by the sovereign prerogative. But as Catherine carried the heavy dispatch box back up to her study, a much larger question loomed over her preparation. How would Queen Camilla react when she walked into the state venue and realized she had been completely replaced as the central female figure of the ceremony? The potential for an immediate, unscripted scene in front of the international press was immense. Catherine unlocked the dispatch box using a unique digital key provided by her husband. Inside lay the revised ceremonial protocol booklet for the morning. The pages were marked with red ink, showing the exact physical tracking lines for the royal procession. Her name had been moved from the secondary guest list directly into the sovereign's immediate party. According to the text, she was to walk exactly 3 paces behind King Charles, occupying the physical space traditionally reserved for the Queen Consort. The Princess of Wales read the operational notes with methodical calm. Every movement had to be executed with absolute precision to avoid any appearance of hesitation. The script detailed the exact second she would step forward toward the altar. The king would turn to face her, lift the consort crown from a velvet cushion held by the archbishop, and place it firmly onto her head. It was a stunning legal maneuver designed to bypass decades of traditional protocol in a single, irreversible public moment. William entered the study a few minutes later, his uniform for the state ceremony already pressed and hanging by the door. He looked at his wife and asked if she had reviewed the final presentation guidelines. Catherine nodded, pointing to the section regarding the public oath of allegiance. William explained that his father had insisted on this specific addition to the program. The oath would legally bind Catherine to her new role as the symbolic matriarch of the family, giving her direct oversight of the primary royal charitable funds before the current reign ended. The preparation inside Adelaide Cottage was intense but completely silent. Catherine's personal stylist arrived through the side entrance at 5 o'clock, carrying a specialized hairpiece designed to support the immense weight of the platinum crown. The crown weighed over 3 pounds and required a specific structural foundation to remain stable during the long walk down the aisle. The stylist worked under the direct supervision of a protection officer, ensuring that no photos or descriptions of the wardrobe could leak to the media before the event began. The clock ticked towards 6 in the morning, and the first light of dawn began to break over the trees of the Windsor estate. William checked his secure tablet, monitoring the live traffic data around the state venue in London. The police barricades were already in place, and the first crowds of spectators were beginning to line the streets. The international broadcast trucks had completed their satellite links, preparing to feed the live images to over 100 countries simultaneously. The world was expecting a standard state procession, completely unaware of the structural earthquake about to take place. Catherine stood up from her dressing table, looking at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She wore the family's traditional diamond earrings, a subtle nod to the continuity of the institution she was about to anchor. She told her husband that she was ready for the transition. She knew that this day would permanently alter her relationship with Camilla, ending any pretense of family unity behind closed doors. But she also understood the necessity of the sacrifice. The monarchy needed a clear, uncontaminated line of future authority, and she was prepared to step into the light. The secure royal vehicle pulled up to the front of the cottage at exactly 6:30. The security team formed a tight perimeter around the car, shielding Catherine from any long-range cameras that might be stationed near the estate boundary. As she stepped into the rear seat, she placed the leather dispatch box beside her. The quiet summoning was over. The next time she returned to this house, she would be holding the symbolic keys to the modern kingdom, and the old hierarchy of the royal family would be gone forever. The St. George's confrontation. The rain stopped just after 7 o'clock in the morning, leaving the stone courtyard of the state venue damp and glistening under the gray London sky. Queen Camilla arrived in the royal state car, accompanied by her senior lady-in-waiting. As the vehicle came to a halt near the private side entrance, she immediately noticed a change in the security layout. The usual contingent of the sovereign's household guards was absent, replaced entirely by officers wearing the tactical badges of Prince William's private security command. Camilla stepped out of the vehicle, her expression tightening as she walked past the silent officers into the holding gallery. The private dressing rooms were located down a long, narrow hallway lined with historic portraits of past monarchs. Camilla walked directly toward her designated suite, only to find the door locked. A young administrative officer stood beside the entrance, holding a clipboard. He stepped forward nervously, bowing his head before stating that the seating and dressing arrangements had been updated by a direct sovereign warrant issued at midnight. He gestured toward a much smaller holding room at the far end of the corridor, traditionally reserved for visiting foreign dignitaries. The small mystery of why her personal suite was locked was resolved in an instant. She had been physically displaced within the venue, but this administrative snub opened a much larger, more explosive question that reverberated through the quiet hallway. Why had King Charles ordered this sudden alteration without consulting her office? And what did this mean for her role in the upcoming live broadcast? Camilla did not move toward the smaller room. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked straight toward the king's private study at the center of the complex. She pushed the heavy oak doors open without waiting for an announcement. Charles was sitting at a small writing desk, dressed in his full state robes of crimson velvet and ermine. William stood right beside him, holding the final printout of the television broadcast schedule. The room fell completely silent as Camilla entered, the door clicking shut behind her. She did not raise her voice, but her tone was sharp and demanding. She looked directly at her husband and asked why her staff had been stripped of their security clearances at the main gate. Charles did not look up from his papers immediately. He reached for his glasses, taking a slow, deliberate breath before facing his wife. He stated that the changes were necessary to protect the integrity of the state ceremony. He pointed to a copy of the amended protocol document sitting on the corner of the desk. The king explained that the financial audits and the discovery of the unvouched European property trusts had forced his hand. The institution could no longer afford any symbolic ambiguity regarding the future of the succession. Camilla turned her gaze toward William, recognizing the true architect of her isolation. She stated that this move was a deliberate public humiliation, timed to destroy her standing in front of the international community. She argued that she had fulfilled every public duty required of her during the king's health struggles, maintaining the public face of the monarchy alone for months. To be pushed aside hours before a major state event was an act of profound betrayal that would permanently fracture the public perception of the family. William stepped forward, his voice calm but completely unyielding. He stated that the public face of the monarchy belonged to those who protected its institutional wealth, not those who sought to build private exit strategies abroad. He pulled a fresh document from his pocket and laid it on the desk. It was the updated seating chart for the main altar stage. Camilla's name had been completely removed from the consort throne. Her new position was located in the secondary family gallery, seated behind the royal duchesses and completely separated from the sovereign's immediate party. The reality of the situation hit Camilla with absolute clarity. This was not a minor dispute over logistics or protocol. It was a fully executed ceremonial deposition. She looked back at her husband, demanding that he overrule the order and reinstate the traditional procession layout. Charles looked down at his desk, his voice cracking slightly as he refused. He stated that the sovereign warrant was already registered with the Home Office and the Privy Council. Legally, the arrangement was locked, and the broadcast directors had already adjusted their camera angles to reflect the new hierarchy. The confrontation was cut short by a sharp knock on the door. The master of ceremonies entered the study, bowing deeply before announcing that the main procession was beginning to form in the outer gallery. The international television feed was now live, and the global audience was watching the dignitaries take their places inside the venue. The master looked nervously between the king, the prince, and the silent queen, waiting for the signal to begin the final countdown for the royal entrance. William looked at his stepmother and stated that she had two distinct choices. She could take her assigned place in the secondary gallery with dignity, or she could refuse to participate entirely, which would require the palace to issue an immediate medical statement explaining her absence. Camilla stared at the two men, her hands clenched tightly around her leather handbag. She knew that an unscripted walkout would only accelerate her permanent exile from the royal estate. Without saying another word, she turned and exited the study, heading down the corridor toward the side entrance of the main hall. William watched her leave, then turned to his father, nodding once to confirm that the immediate crisis was managed. The king stood up slowly, the heavy weight of his state robes pressing down on his shoulders. The emotional toll of the confrontation was visible on his face, but his movements remained deliberate. The family drama was now over, and the public stage was completely clear for the most stunning transfer of symbolic authority the modern world had ever seen: the silent coronation of Catherine. The weight of the crown did not just settle on Catherine's head. It altered the entire physical layout of Westminster Abbey within seconds. As the last echoes of the choir faded into the stone rafters, the traditional hierarchy of the court dissolved in full view of the 700 guests. The live broadcast remained completely silent, the audio cut by a master switch in the production truck, but the visual cues told the entire story. The first major shift happened within the royal security perimeter. The protection officers assigned to the Princess of Wales did not wait for the formal recessional to begin. They moved with silent, aggressive precision. Two senior officers stationed near the north transept immediately stepped forward, crossing the ceremonial carpet to take up positions directly behind Catherine's new chair. In doing so, they formed a human wall that physically cut off Camilla's remaining security detail from the immediate circle around the altar. The message to the court was unmistakable. The primary security interest of the state had shifted. Catherine was no longer just a supporting member of the family. She was now the central asset. Then came the moment that signaled total institutional submission. General Sir Mark Carleton Smith, standing at the head of the household cavalry contingent near the high altar, turned toward Catherine. He did not look at the king, nor did he look at the Archbishop of Canterbury. He cleared his throat, his riding boots clicking sharply on the ancient Cosmati mosaic floor. With a slow, deliberate movement, he lowered his ceremonial sword by its hilt, bringing the blade perfectly parallel to the stone floor in a full, formal royal salute. This specific salute is a weapon of immense symbolic power. It is strictly reserved for the reigning monarch or a designated regent of the realm. By offering this salute to Catherine, while King Charles still sat wearing his own crown on the opposite side of the altar, the British military had just publicly declared its allegiance. They were signaling to the politicians in the front pews that the line of succession had been violently accelerated. The military was already treating Catherine as the de facto leader of the modern shelf. Behind Catherine, Prince William remained entirely motionless, his hands clasped over his ceremonial sword hilt. His eyes were fixed on the back of his wife's neck. A small nerve twitched in his jaw, but his face remained a mask of stone. He did not step forward to assist her with the heavy headpiece, nor did he look toward his stepmother. He simply watched the trap spring. Catherine's awareness showed in the very way she carried the weight. The crown had been sized for Camilla, meaning it should have slipped or tilted precariously on Catherine's smaller frame. Instead, she adjusted her posture with a single, sharp tilt of her chin. Her dark hair had been styled in an unusually dense, low bun, a specific architectural choice that perfectly anchored the heavy gold band. This detail proved that this was no sudden, chaotic ambush. Catherine had undergone private fittings for this exact scenario days prior. She had walked into the abbey knowing exactly what her father-in-law intended to do. From the front row, a senior royal aide raised a small white program booklet, holding it at chest height for exactly 2 seconds. It was a pre-arranged signal. Immediately, the broadcasting technicians in the trucks outside began to pan the cameras away from the altar, forcing the global television feed onto wide, sweeping shots of the abbey's vaulted ceilings. The palace was systematically blinding the public to the finer details of the transition, ensuring that the raw, human reactions of the family remained hidden behind the stone walls. Camilla stood 2 paces back, her lace dress rustling slightly as she shifted her weight. She did not look at the cameras, and she did not look at her husband. Her gaze was locked entirely on the glittering diamond cross protruding from the top of the crown, now resting on Catherine's head. The woman who had spent 30 years navigating the shadows to reach the throne had just been pushed out of the frame by the very institution she had fought to join. The shockwave through the palace walls. The heavy mahogany doors of the Regency room inside Buckingham Palace did not just close. They slammed with a definitive, ringing thud that echoed down the picture gallery. Outside, the midday sun beat down on thousands of confused tourists gathering at the palace gates. Inside, the air smelled of stale wax, polished brass, and sheer, unfiltered panic. The official procession from Westminster Abbey had been cut short. The traditional balcony appearance was cancelled. The royal family had retreated straight into the private apartments, leaving the world to watch a blank palace balcony under a gray London sky. King Charles sat in a high-backed armchair, his ceremonial robes half unbuttoned at his throat. He looked entirely spent. His breathing was shallow, his face a pale, pasty shade that terrified his personal secretary. Standing across from him, entirely unmoving, was the woman who had entered the abbey as queen consort and walked out stripped of her crowning glory. Camilla did not storm around the room. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she stood by the tall window overlooking the gardens, her fingers clutching a linen handkerchief so tightly her knuckles showed stark white. The silence was broken by the sharp, repetitive clicking of a keyboard. A senior communications aide sat at a side table, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of a palace laptop. He was staring at the official royal family website. Less than 10 minutes after the crown was placed on Catherine's head, an automated press release had gone live on the state wire. The headline had sent the global press room into an absolute frenzy. A statement regarding the succession and the alteration of the royal consort title. The aide's hand shook as he reached for the mouse. He deleted the post. He completely pulled it down within 42 seconds of its appearance, but the damage was already done. Newsrooms from London to New York had already captured the text. The deleted announcement explicitly stated that Queen Camilla had voluntarily requested a reassignment of her royal status due to upcoming structural changes in the governance of the realm. It was a lie, a hastily prepared cover story, meant to shield the public from the raw reality of the king's forced decision. Prince William stood near the fireplace, his arms tightly crossed over his military tunic. He looked at the aide, then turned his gaze back to his father. The tension between the two men was palpable. William had known about the midnight document signed at Highgrove, but seeing the plan executed with such brutal, public finality was different. He knew that the deletion of the press release meant the palace press office was actively revolting against the king's sudden maneuver. The different royal households, Clarence House, Kensington Palace, and Buckingham Palace, were openly at war with one another. Then, the true reason for this frantic closed-door scramble became agonizingly clear. A white leather binder sat on the table next to the king. It contained the minutes from an emergency session of the Privy Council held 48 hours prior. Inside those pages lay the secret medical report that changed everything. The panel of royal physicians had given Charles a strict, uncompromising briefing. The current medical regimen had ceased to be effective. His cognitive and physical stamina were projected to decline sharply before the arrival of autumn. The council had laid out the chessboard. If Charles became incapacitated while Camilla held the full symbolic weight of the crown, the transition period would be a constitutional nightmare. The public, already skeptical of the Queen Consort's historical role, would resist her involvement in state affairs during a regency. The monarchy would fracture at its weakest point. The briefing left Charles with only one viable path to secure the family legacy. He had to use the absolute pinnacle of his remaining authority to forcefully elevate Catherine while he still had the physical strength to do so. He needed the world to see the crown on Catherine's head before the autumn leaves began to fall. The door to the Regency room clicked open, and a junior equerry stepped inside, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor to avoid looking at the shattered queen by the window. He held a secure encrypted tablet, He approached Prince William and handed it over without a word. On the screen was a leaked text message that had just bypassed the palace firewall. It was a communication sent from a senior royal aide directly to a major British broadcaster. The text was brief but devastating. The king has acted alone. The household is in total collapse. The Queen has left the building. William looked up from the screen and cast his eyes toward the window. Camilla was no longer looking at the gardens. She had turned around, her eyes locked onto the tablet in William's hand. She knew exactly what that leak meant. The institutional machine that had protected her for 3 decades had just discarded her to protect the future line. Camilla did not wait for the king's permission to leave. She did not look at Charles, nor did she acknowledge Catherine, who sat quietly in the corner of the room, still wearing the heavy gold headpiece. Camilla walked straight past the security detail at the door. She did not head toward her private apartments at Clarence House. Instead, an unmarked black vehicle was already waiting in the interior courtyard of the palace. Staff members watched from the upper windows as the former queen consort stepped into the back seat completely alone. She had bypassed the traditional royal escort. There were no outriders, no flashing lights, and no ceremonial guards. The vehicle moved quietly through the side gates of Buckingham Palace, turning west toward her private estate in Wiltshire. She was retreating from the center of British power, leaving the crown behind on the head of a younger woman. Inside the Regency room, King Charles looked at his eldest son. The room was finally quiet, the frantic typing of the aides having stopped as they realized the narrative had completely escaped their control. The king pointed a trembling finger at the white medical binder on the table. He whispered 3 words that the palace staff would whisper for months afterward. "It is done. The crown has shifted, and the House of Windsor will never be the same." King Charles made a brutal, historic choice to secure the monarchy's survival, leaving the palace divided and the world in complete shock. Now, the future of the British throne rests squarely on Catherine's shoulders. Did King Charles make the right decision by sacrificing Camilla's standing to protect the crown? Or has this public humiliation broken the royal family beyond repair?